I'm Perry Clausen, Executive Director of the East San Joaquin Water Quality Coalition. My job is to represent farmers to the Regional Water Quality Control Board and assist them in adopting practices that are protective of surface and groundwater. I'm going to go over the nitrogen summary report. Growers have been very receptive to changing practices. They work these lands, they live near these waterways, so they're very concerned about protecting the resources that are part of their operation and surround their farms. So when we started sampling in 2004, I was skeptical that we were going to find the problems that the Regional Water Board had described before they developed our regulation. The first time these results came across an email, I was amazed. I picked up the phone, called Michael Johnson, and said, "Are we sure that these results are accurate?" When I received the email with those results, the surprising thing wasn't there was just one or two waterways with pesticides. Every single waterway that we were sampling had pesticides, nutrients, or other constituents that were above the standards set by the state. The problems that we were finding initially were insecticides applied to almonds, walnuts, and alfalfa, especially across the regions, the eastern side of our valley, where the orchards were planted very close to the waterways. When we find a pesticide in the water the first time, that's a red flag. But when we find it twice, that triggers the initiation of a management plan. And a management plan has three simple requirements. Find out the source of that exceedance, what are the potential crops that it's used on, and then work with growers to solve those problems. At first, as we had been doing for years, we held meetings with growers at restaurants and agriculture facilities, went over the problems that we had found, showed them the crops we believed were the cause of the problem, and worked to encourage growers to adopt practices. Unfortunately, after 6 months or so, we still were finding exceedances in these waterways. So what we started to do was map our regions to try to focus in on where these sources of products could be coming from. And that's when we used our GIS mapping, and we identified our members that were adjacent to the waterways as a starting point to try to determine where the source of the problem was. We had to select our priority watersheds, in other words, the waterways with the most number of exceedances. So we selected Dry Creek in Stanislaus County as our first sort of prototype of how we would address these problems. The most common insecticide exceedance that we were seeing in that waterway was chlorpyrifos. This is a product used in almonds, walnuts, and alfalfa, all of which were grown in the Dry Creek watershed. Myself and Wayne Zipser got in our truck, drove out to that area, and started visiting with growers one by one, sequentially from the sampling site all the way up to the foothills. So over about a 4 to 5 month period, we visited over 30 growers that were farming adjacent to that waterway. So when we looked at the practices that growers were using to apply these products, we noticed the other pathways that these products make their way in. Winter storm runoff or irrigation drainage weren't possible because the growers had irrigation systems such as micro sprinklers and drip, and there was no storms occurring in the middle of the summer. So that left spray drift as our culprit, a potential culprit for causing these exceedances. So as we started having outreach meetings with these growers, meeting with them, we especially emphasized when they were making applications next to these waterways to be extra careful to ensure the wind was blowing away from the waterway, that the outside nozzles were shut off, and that they did everything they could to prevent spray drift from moving into these waterways. Since we started sampling in 2004, we've taken over 2,600 samples and performed more than 77,000 analysis of those water samples to determine if there were farm inputs making their way into waterways. That has cost us over $10 million. After the grower visits began, we started seeing results immediately from our visits. It was the following season's applications where we started to see a dramatic decline, in fact, an elimination of the exceedances in Dry Creek watershed. 3 years after having a summer with 2 insecticide exceedances, chlorpyrifos was no longer detected in samples collected from Dry Creek. Now 6 years later, since we started taking this approach, it's rare that we get a report back with an exceedance of a pesticide standard or any toxicity. In fact, we go through a whole summer with maybe 1 or 2 exceedances that have been found throughout the 25 waterways that we sample. The management practices that growers are using are not unique to the region of the East San Joaquin Coalition. What is unique is the outreach approach, the one-on-one personal contacts that we've used with dozens and dozens of growers. No one had done that before in the Central Valley. We had no idea if it was going to work, but we found, and the growers proved, that once they are aware of the problem, they are willing to act on those problems.